You see, about a year ago, I started to notice two trends in the world of guitar that I just could no longer ignore. The first of which was that amp sims were absolutely taking over. Now, this wasn't necessarily breaking news to anyone in the world of gear. I mean, digital modelers, kind of like this guy right here, had been around for years and years and years, but my big thing was the difference in quality and just how much of a leap they had actually taken over the past 5 to 10 years. Even units like Universal Audio's Dream 65, which came out a couple years ago in A/B testing situations, were literally holding their own against the actual vintage amps that they were modeled after with professional ears on them, like ones that are much better than mine. I mean, everything was getting so crazy, the hype was so big that I felt like I had to get in on the action. So I made this video, right, where I pulled out my pedals and I pulled out the Dream 65 and I put it up against a Tonex, two of the big players at the time, and I put them against my actual Princeton to see how close they could actually get. And to my ears, this was actually a really cool moment. Although I didn't fully understand at the time just how powerful these two machines were, I think it represented something that most modern guitar players would probably agree with and that we talk about a lot. The fact that we're living in this really cool time, that we can get tones in our bedroom for relatively cheap that people 25, 30 years ago couldn't even have fathomed. And even in subcultures of those, there are different options. There are the helixes, there are the amp pedals, there are the different VSTs. The list just kind of goes on and on and on. Now, this was captivating enough, and I mean, I think about this kind of stuff all the time, but the second trend that I noticed actually approached a similar problem, but from a completely different angle, I felt like. You see, the second trend isn't specifically about modeling, but more about a very important subgenre that I keep noticing within the digital modeling phenomenon. It has a lot to do with the fact that the more that I noticed that big units like the Helix were coming out, more small units, basically pedal platforms, seemed to follow suit. Things that weren't necessarily meant to be all-in-ones, you know, things that could fit on the end of a pedal board. And I know what you're thinking. You're like, Mike, we get it. You were just telling us the story about your Dream 65 and your Tone Y or whatever. But when I say smaller units in this context, I'm talking about like tiny ones. I mean, these things are already very small in context when you put them up against something like a Quad Cortex, which is meant for mobility. But then all of a sudden, Boss drops the IR2, Line 6 drops the Pod Express, and I'm thinking to myself, these things aren't just small anymore. They're getting like minuscule. They're getting stripped down like never before, and they're packing so much into these tiny units. And it made me really wonder those questions that you always ask with the guitar community. What's going to come next, and who's going to try and compete? And that's where I actually ended up finding this little guy. Now, what actually is this? Well, it's called a Tone X1, and essentially it's a more stripped down version of that Tone X that I was just showing you earlier. And I've been using that thing for about a year. I've genuinely liked the tones. I've used it for different videos and recording purposes, but I want to tell you why I think that this little more stripped down version, and why stripped down versions of pedals as a whole may have the potential to be even more groundbreaking than their original predecessors. Okay, so at first glance, I know what you're thinking, right? How could you be telling me that a stripped down version of a pedal could potentially be more impactful than, I don't know, the OG unit itself? Well, my answer to that would be it depends on if you're maintaining the same tonal capabilities. So if we're talking specifically about this guy right here, all those initial captures that you had are still available to you, even if it's a Tone X SE software versus the original one. A lot of the times when companies will come out with a second iteration or stripped down version, they end up giving you completely different amps. And even if they sound really good, it's like they're giving you the lower level things. So being able to maintain those same tonal capabilities and those same captures, that is gigantic. A bigger thing just coming in a tinier package. However, I'm not going to pretend there's not any trade-offs. With a smaller unit, you're getting less preset slots and no MIDI, which could be a big deal for some people. But the idea to me of having such a compact design and being able to save that much space on your board is literally invaluable. I mean, I built a board with this. I built a mini board and put it at the end, and it was a straight game changer for, you know, saving space. Okay, so here's where things potentially can get really interesting. I don't think it's always about what you're losing in functions. I think the assumption a lot of the times is that because you're getting a more stripped down, more entry level model, you're going to be losing a lot of these things. But with a lot of these models, simply just because they're newer, they have newer technology and new functions. The new one with the Tone X1 may not have seemed like the flashiest thing to me at all times, but the more I get into building rigs, it seems to become almost invaluable. And that happens to be, drumroll please, the tuner. Yes, you heard me correctly. The tuner. In my opinion, if we're strictly talking about mobile use, I think the addition of a tuner actually puts the Tone X1 above the Tone X, because a tuner isn't just another function, right? I've seen second iterations of different pedals add a whole bunch of different functions, a whole bunch of new overdrives, new compressors, new distortions, whatever that is, and that's really, really cool. But when you're adding a tuner, you're literally eliminating the need for a completely different pedal, therefore saving more space and in turn changing the entire layout of the board as a whole. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about a potential trade-off that actually has to do with the ergonomics of some of these more stripped down units. And that's actually the knobs that the original unit has to offer. One of the things that I'm learning more and more about as I get more into my gear journey and more about like what people like is that tweakability is big for some people. And for some people, it's literally everything when it comes to choosing different units, both digital and analog. I'm not saying something like this doesn't have knobs. I mean, very clearly they're there. But let's be honest, it's a very different experience than something like this when you can turn every knob and every knob is big. Tweakability is a huge thing for a lot of guitar players, and it's a very big word for a lot of reasons. And I think that it really just shows when choosing between two different pedals or two different units, a lot of the times it's more than just about the general sound. It's about those little things that may seem small to me, like tweakability, but to someone who really likes having physical knobs, that's the end all be all of how they set things in the live setting or in the recording process. Now, one thing I've yet to talk about, even with the original Atonex, is the potential of using one of these as a stomp box instead of as an amp. Now, this is important for a lot of different reasons that go way deeper than just I like Tonex. I think anytime a company comes out with a pedal platform, you know that you're not just competing against the other pedals, but you're competing against the idea that someone could go with another different all-in-one that'll be able to do everything. So you need to be able to add something in there that'll make you competitive. The first thing that I think the Tonex has above a lot of other people is that you're not just modeling a specific amp. You can get through the process of profiling basically anything you want. But you have to take it even a step further if you really want to stay competitive and want to stay in the game. And that's where I feel like something like a stomp box mode really does set them apart, especially once they decided to go way smaller, because this almost becomes like an amp overdrive flex unit, something that I really didn't even consider because I didn't even really know about the original Tonex. I knew that they had some clones on there, but simply because I wanted something this big that would take up that much space on my board just to stay as an amp. But with a much smaller, way more compact unit that could be a flex pedal that's a lot cheaper, I would feel much more likely to have this, or to see someone with maybe two of these, to have one as an amp and one as a flex and be able to do different things. Maybe use one as a tube screamer, maybe use one as a clon, maybe use one as a Vox, which is what I did earlier when I was putting together a different board just to see what the stomp box would actually feel like. So here's what I'm thinking, right? These two things right here, they're very similar. You're essentially getting the same sounds from the same company. But one of the things that I keep on learning every day about different modelers and different smaller pedal platforms is that the farther along we go, it becomes more and more than just about the sounds. It's about what you can offer me practicality wise and what you can do to get an edge. With the way that I feel like technology is going in terms of digital amp units, pretty much everything sounds good if you know what you're doing or you know how to get a great sound. So simply sounding good, that kind of becomes the baseline. That's like the entry point. If you don't sound phenomenal, you're not even in the race to begin with. Now, with Tonex not really marketing itself as an all-in-one modeler, the ability to have it in that stomp box mode or to have infinite different amps that you can profile, that's what's really going to set it apart from a lot of these different pedal platform units and pedal amps. And with something like this following that trend that we were initially talking about with being so small, it could be a real competitor. And if I were to go strictly off of what I need from my board, sometimes I really like the big pedals. I really like having something like this on my board and being able to twist knobs and whatnot. But I have to be honest that something like this potentially presents so many new opportunities. I mean, you are losing a few of the preset slots. You don't get the knobs quite as much, but for half the price, you're getting a smaller pedal, still with the infinite amp capabilities and a tuner. And some of those little things that may have seemed so unflashy to me a couple years ago start to just become these really, really big things. And those big things can potentially change an entire rig. But again, I can see why people would go with either unit, but I don't think it matters what I think and what I can see. What matters is what you think. So please let me know. Do you like the Tonex? Do you think the Tonex one is a big improvement? Do you not like modelers in general? Please let me know in the comments. Anyway, thank you so much for watching this video. I don't think I really began to understand just how crazy this phenomenon of tiny amp pedals had gotten until I started to realize this and some of the other ones. But if you want to know anything more about the Tonex one, the links are in the description. Make sure to check out one of the best ways to support the channel if that's something you want to do, or if you're just curious about any of the other gear that I used in this video, like the PRS. Make sure to check out those links. Also, thank you so much to all my patrons. There's some extra stuff on there if you want to check it out, some extra content. Like and subscribe if you had a good time, and most important of all, have a fantastic day.